Hello, welcome to The Verdict, a podcast by the Carlson Law Firm. And in this series, we talk all about car collisions, the injuries that happen because of them, and the surrounding topics. I'm your host, Jeffrey Hinkson, and today, in this episode, we're talking about car collisions with government entities. And in this episode, I'm joined by Craig Carlson and Mike Erskine. Now, this is a ongoing series with different topics, and I wanted to get people to get to know y'all a little bit better. So if we can get y'all to introduce yourselves, starting with Craig.
Yeah, my name is Craig Carlson, and I am the managing partner and owner of the Carlson Law Firm. And my main office is in Killeen, Texas, which is next to Fort Hood, for those of you who may not know. And I've been practicing law in Texas since 1994. And I've been a lawyer since 1989, so 30 some years.
Thank you for being on, Greg.
Yeah, sure.
And Mike?
Mike Erskine, I'm also here in Killeen. I have been a lawyer, not quite as long as Craig, but since 2002. And I've been happily representing injured people for all kinds of things, both in Texas and across the United States during that time.
Right. Thank you also, Mike, for being on today. And so like I mentioned at the top, we're talking about crash with government entities. And I wanted to cover this particular topic because there can be instances where someone might be in a collision with, say, like a police car or EMS or a postal office truck. And I wanted people to have sort of a guide, sort of a knowledge base in case a situation like that does happen to them. And also because this dives deeper into the topics with Texas Tort Claims Act, Federal Tort Claims Act. We have an episode on that. Be sure to listen, watch that episode so you can get a basic understanding of some of the deeper topics in this episode. Now, Craig, I wanted to start with you. And we asked this question before in a previous one, but in case someone missed it, is can I sue the government?
Okay, and the answer is generally yes. No matters what government you're talking about. So if you're talking about the federal government, it has certain rules about suing it. All government entities are generally immune from lawsuits. And the only way you can sue them is they pass a law that allows you to sue them under certain instances. So for example, the federal government has passed a law called the Federal Tort Claims Act, and it allows you to sue them as if they were a regular individual under certain circumstances. And you have to do some admin stuff before you can actually file a suit. So under the federal law, you'd have to file a standard form 95 claim form, and you have to fill it out properly. You have to send it to the right agency that is overseeing that entity, like the Department of Army for the Army or the Postal Service. And you have to file that claim form within your statute of limitations in whatever state you are, but in Texas, that would be 2 years. And you can't sue the US government unless you file a Federal Tort Claims Act form, for example. So unlike if somebody ran into you and it was an individual, you could contact their insurance company and then you could try to resolve your claim. And if you couldn't, you could just go ahead and file a suit. But with the United States government, you have to actually file a claim form first, and you have to give them at least 6 months to decide what to do with your claim. And after 6 months, you can file a lawsuit if you wish, or you can still try to negotiate it with the US government. The other neat, it's unusual because you have to do it that way, but it's also neat because once you file your claim form against the US government, it tolls the statute of limitations. So whereas statute of limitations in Texas is 2 years, and if you were in a car crash, you'd have to sue whoever caused that crash within 2 years. If you file your claim form, it tolls the statute until the federal government either denies your claim, or I guess it's tolled until then, or resolves it with you.
Yeah. because I, like you had mentioned, there's a lot that goes into it, and it can be complex for some people, and some people, because Mike, I want to ask you this, because some people, they think of like police cars and EMS, if something happens, that they're immune. And I want to know, in the general sense, what are some other conditions that someone might need to build and to have a successful case against them?
Well, if you're talking, or if you're talking about the federal government, and I don't know if you were, but if you are, like a police car or ambulance from the federal government, you still have to file a claim form to go forward. But if they're an emergency run, and Mike can deal with this with the state as well, but that brings in a whole other set of issues, and I'll let Mike address that.
Yeah, so there is kind of a, if you're looking at Texas, and the question is like, hey, I was hit by a police car. Now, as their police car was coming, they hit me. One of the first questions you have to kind of figure out is, were they responding to an emergency? Because again, like Craig said, is both federal and state, the general rule is you are allowed to go after the government for motor vehicle collisions. That's kind of one of the very specific things is, if there's a motor vehicle collision and it's a government vehicle in Texas, you can go after them, you can file a lawsuit to make a claim. But there's some exceptions to that, and one of the exceptions is if they're responding to an emergency. So kind of one thing you have to look at is, were the lights and sirens on? Were they responding to an emergency? Because then the rule changes. And the rule is generally they're immune. You can't go after them if they're if they're responding to an emergency. Now, that doesn't mean that you're completely out of luck. There's certain things that you can do. You can look at, it's like, okay, well, were they really responding to an emergency? And I've had some cases where I had a client who was hit by a police vehicle, and the police report and everyone said, no, the lights and sirens were on, they were going. When we dug a little bit deeper, it turned out that for that specific case, the officer in question was not actually responding to a 911 call. He just had his lights and sirens on for some reason while he was driving too fast down the road. But I'll tell you, that's honestly probably a pretty rare situation, and you do have to do some digging to figure that stuff out. So, the default is, yeah, you can go after, a police officer hits you with his car, you can go after them. But if he was responding to an emergency, you're probably out of luck in most cases.
Yeah, what Mike's talking about is the Texas Tort Claims Act, which is similar to the Federal Tort Claims Act. So Texas is immune from lawsuits generally as a state. And then what they do is they pass a law and they say, we'll allow individuals to sue us under certain circumstances. And one big circumstance they allow you to sue under is car crashes. So if somebody's driving a car for the state and they run a red light and run into you, and they're treated kind of like an individual at that point. Except, we'll talk about the caps that apply to city, state, and county. There's some caps that you can't go over. So they allow themselves to be sued, but only to a certain extent. And also, to sue the state under the Texas Tort Claims Act, you have to give them notice as well within 6 months, and it's a written notice of that and that claim. And it has to give a description about what your injuries are, what the damage was that you suffered, the time and place of the incident, and what happened, basically, is what you have to tell them. It's not necessarily a form like the federal form is for Federal Tort Claims Act. Is an actual form that you have to fill out correctly.
And you want to say something, Mike?
I was just going to say, and Craig, that's kind of one of the interesting differences is, as far as the Federal Tort Claims Act is, to that extent, it's actually a neater, cleaner process, because they actually provide a form that has spaces that you fill out, and it's kind of self-explanatory, or it's much more user-friendly. Under Texas, it's just like, hey guys, if it's the state or a county, within 6 months, you have to give us information. And typically it's kind of like the who, what, where, when, and why, but it's not a form. And typically what they'll do is a lot of times they'll argue that even if you within that 6 months, or if it's a city, it could be as low as 60 days or less. They'll argue that, well, yeah, you sent us a letter, and I guess you tried to give us notice, but the notice was insufficient. We couldn't figure out from what you told us what the information is. So that's kind of another difference between federal and Texas thing. And to a certain extent, the Federal Tort Claims Act is there's a more predictable methodology to put them on notice. In Texas, you got to be real careful how you give the notice, not only that it's timely, but it has the correct information in it. So again, that's kind of another one of those reasons is, do you want to try and do it yourself? Maybe. You're probably going to have better luck having a lawyer handle that kind of stuff for you, because it's real easy to mess it up.
Right, and you got to send it the right place, and that can be a little dicey, particularly when you're talking about like cities and municipalities and counties. And was this a county truck? Was this a city truck? Was it a state truck? Stuff like that. You really do want a lawyer, because sometimes, you're going to shotgun blast this notice to every entity that it could be, just so that you don't miss one. There is an exception under the state rule, which there is not under the federal rule. The federal rule, you have to file that claim form within 2 years. In Texas, or whatever your statute of limitations is in the state this happens. In Texas, there's an exception, whereas if they have actual notice of something that happened. But like Mike said, that exception, like, for example, you're down at the city hall, they're having a meeting with all the council people, the city attorney, and somebody runs into you right in front of, let's assume right in front of them all. You could claim that they know that there was a car wreck and a city vehicle hit somebody. But you never really want to get into that exception, because you're really going to hope that the court will agree that that was an okay exception. So if you have missed a deadline and you hadn't filed your claim, and you believe that you can prove that the city, the county, the state knew that this happened, you still should contact a lawyer, because there might be a chance you could file your claim still, but you really don't want to be in the exception category by yourself. I mean, and you certainly don't want to miss a deadline ever if you can help it.
Yeah, because you had mentioned like deadlines and cap amounts and things of that nature, and I'm guessing it sort of fits in. So say an instance does happen where I'm in a collision with a police car or a different type of sheriff's car or anything of that nature. Is that sort of the process, like filing in the deadline, like setting a cap amount, or trying to figure out how much the damages are worth? Like, what is that process like?
Well, I mean, for the federal government, the big difference between the federal government and the state is there are no caps in the federal government for car crashes. For the state and for the local government municipalities, there are. So there, I mean, it doesn't matter what your damages are. I mean, even if somebody ran into you and they killed you, you're capped at $250,000 if you're suing the state. The counties are generally 100,000, and the municipalities are 250,000 per person. And then you double that for if you had multiple people in your car. Can go up to $500,000 for the state, 300,000 for local county area, and then $500,000 for municipalities. So there are caps, but and that's what makes these cases challenging too, because a lot of the municipalities belong to an agency that helps them resolve these claims. And once they know there's a cap, which they know there are in all these areas of the state law, they're very difficult to deal with, because the only hammer that injured people have on an entity or a person who hurts them is going and having a jury set a fair amount for what happened, the harms and losses they suffered. And when you have a cap, like with anything, like the state and local municipalities have, they're not really afraid of a big verdict. And so it's very difficult to deal with them, and you definitely need a lawyer because particularly the bigger the case, the harder they are to deal with. So I don't know what your experience has been with that with Mike, but my experience has been, you know, when somebody is really hurt by one of these entities, because of the cap, they play games, they make you file lawsuits, they make you spend money, which comes out of your recovery. And it's kind of sad, actually.
That's uniformly been my experience dealing with state entities. The Texas Tort Claims Act they really use it as it's kind of, you may have heard the phrase before is, you know, something's intended to be used as a shield, not a sword. And, you know, probably the Texas Tort Claims Act was probably intended to be a shield for municipalities for, you know, not having to pay out large verdicts. But the reality is they use it as a sword to avoid doing what's right or fair. And they do, you know, they delay. I've, you know, in municipal entities, state entities, is they'll just deny or ignore a claim that any other rational person or group would look at and go, okay, well, we can agree to disagree on some stuff, but okay, I mean, we did something, we need to talk to you. The government entities will just flat out go, you know what, our worst day that can ever happen to us is maybe you eventually get a jury verdict, but we're only ever going to have to pay $250. We think we can outweigh and we can outspend you on that. So no, I mean, it's not based on fairness. It's not based on treating people right. It's based on there's nothing you can do with us, and we'll make you spend more money than it's worth to get justice. And I've literally had claims handlers with the state and the city say that to me. They're not shy about
it. And a follow-up question to that, Mike, because you said they give you pushback and things of that nature. Like, how long does it necessarily take for a case to resolve? Like, specifically, you had mentioned like some with police cars and things of that nature. How long does it take for those cases to get resolved?
You know, honestly, I wish I could give you it. It's so wildly different. It's hard to put like an exact time frame on it. I'd say in general, they take longer than other comparative cases and claims with kind of a more standard insurance. You know, like if you had a case in a car crash and people were insured by, you know, like a State Farm or an Allstate or a USAA, a Texas Tort Claims Act based claim, and frankly, probably the Federal Tort Claims Act claims will typically take a lot longer. I mean, it's hard to put kind of an exact thing on it, but they take longer. And again, it's just because there's a process, there's more pushback. You know, think about when you go down to the post office to mail something and you stand in line. That's about how fast they move.
And then speaking of post offices, I want to know, Craig, with post office vehicles, I had heard that there might be different, that they might be harder in terms of like in the process of cases and trying to have a successful case with the post office vehicle. Well, how has that been like for you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've handled cases all over the state and actually all over the country under the Federal Tort Claims Act, and the Postal Service. They're all kind of unique, but as Mike said, they're all slow. All of these entities are hoping that you miss some deadline so that they win automatically, and so and that's why people should never try to handle their own. You know, there's this saying, you don't want to be your own lawyer, or if you're a doctor, you shouldn't be your own doctor. I mean, it really, you shouldn't. If you really want to hire someone, not just a lawyer who does all kinds of practice. You want to hire a personal injury lawyer, and then you should ask them how many cases they've ever tried, and really how many claims they've ever handled, Texas Tort Claims Act cases or Federal Tort Claims Act cases. I've handled several postal cases for individuals, and lawyers have called me to handle them for their clients, and they do take a little bit longer, and they claim a lot more of knowledge on the part of drivers seeing the postal vehicle out there. Just like with anything with federal government, it does take longer, and the cases will linger a little bit. And with COVID, of course, all cases lingered, because the only way we have to help people who are injured is having jury trials, or having, which kind of brings me to another point. If you sue the federal government, you don't get a jury. The case is handled by a federal judge. And so the judge is the jury, and he's everything. So you can only sue the federal government in federal court. So you will not be in state court, and which is a whole different process and a whole different procedure. But yeah, they take longer, but we've had a lot of success handling. I handle a lot of Federal Tort Claims Act cases, because when I was in the Army, I actually was in the claims section, and I defended the military in cases and worked with the U.S. Justice Department to defend hospitals from malpractice that are military hospitals, and the government and for claims. And why that's great is because I've been out of the Army since 1994. And so for the last 20 years or 30 years almost, I've been helping individuals fight through the system and take on the US government. And that's why a lot of times lawyers actually call me with cases, because dealing with the Federal Tort Claims Act and dealing in federal court with these cases is pretty unique. And there's a small group of people that do it regularly.
I was going to say, Craig brought up an interesting point about the Federal Tort Claims Act is you don't get to go do those cases in front of a jury. They're always in front of a judge or a magistrate. But you know, it's one of those. There's some actually some pros to that. What you say, Craig, is there's some pros to having a judge only trial, especially at the federal court level. And my experience has been, and Craig, tell me if it's been the same thing with you, is oftentimes the federal court judges are less sympathetic to government positions and arguments than an equivalent, kind of like the equivalent judge in a state court when hearing from a city or a county or a state attorney.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think federal judges, I enjoy being in federal court, because the one thing I know is the federal judges do know the law, generally speaking, and they do apply it. And they are pretty good on deadlines, meaning they don't let people just linger out there. And so I do enjoy being in front of federal judges for that matter. But the court matter, it kind of matters what judge at times too. But the state system, the other problem with the reason the federal system is a little bit better than the state system is the state system is, and this applies to the Texas Tort Claims Act, but it also applies to your regular auto accident. You get a jury, but you don't get to tell the jury things. Like, for example, a regular auto case, the jury's not told that there's insurance or how much insurance there is. They're kind of left lingering out there thinking, and that the defense lawyers can't say that their clients have to pay it, but they say about everything but that. So they imply, if the jury gives you an award, that Mrs. Jones, who's 84 years old, has to pay this case, which is not true. And so the system's kind of, I just wish it was more upfront with the jurors about what's going on. For example, if you get hit by a state vehicle and you go in there and the state makes you, I mean, they'll make you jump through every hoop before they pay. And they make you spend all this money that comes out of your recovery. And a jury might hear this case and say, oh my gosh, you know, we need to give this lady $3 million. We killed her husband. And in the end, that's going to be cut. The judge is going to, because the judge won't have any choice, enter an award for $250,000. And, you know, in that regard, it's a really sad system. There's in the normal auto accident world, if insurance companies bargain unfairly with you, there is some rate repercussions of where you might be able to get over the limits of the insurance to pay you. But under the state system, there's no such thing. So you're going to be capped at $250,000 no matter what. And you would think they would pay it right up front, but they want to make sure you file your claim correctly. They want to make sure you file your case correctly. They want to make sure you do everything correctly before they pay you a dime.
Because I heard you mention insurance, and that's another thing I wanted to ask you. Because in regular, well, when I say regular, I mean like a mom and another mom crashing, having a collision, and there's auto insurance. My thinking would be like, if there was a collision with a federal vehicle or a state vehicle, is my auto insurance involved, or do they back away knowing it's more of like something that deals with the state or the federal government?
Well, I mean, with the federal government, they're all self-insured. And so they don't have insurance involved at all. And in fact, your insurance company will want you to go through the federal system and get paid. If you have collision, they might, pay for your damages and wait to be paid back from the federal government. But Mike can address the states a little bit different because he's dealt with a lot of these cases. Some municipalities, like on school buses and other vehicles, have a quasi insurance, I would describe it, where they're paying into a pool that will pay the claims, but it's not really technically. I mean, it might be technically insurance, but it's not. They're not dealt with like an insurance company, right, Mike?
Yeah, no, there's so yeah, the answer is in Texas, there are certain entities, and you just kind of you've got to get to know which ones they are, but there are certain cities and counties that are, for all practical purposes, self-insured, which means that if one of their vehicles are involved with you, is anything they pay comes out of the city or the county bank account. It's tax dollars. But that's actually getting really, really rare now. What you more see in Texas are these, in fact, the biggest one is called the Texas Municipal League. But these municipal leagues, where it's either kind of this hybrid of multiple government agencies, again, usually counties or cities band together, and they have kind of, they pool funds, and they kind of manage risk that way. But there are things where it's essentially the cities are purchasing insurance. And there's insurance companies who will sell insurance to cities and counties. And now the interesting thing with that is it's a great deal for the insurance companies because they do all the same things. It's super low risk. They're never going to have to pay more on any individual claim than what the capped amount is. And they know that they can fight it all day long while kind of spreading those costs out amongst a bunch of different cities and counties. So it's a good business deal. That's why they do it. But it kind of actually exacerbates all those problems of, well, why should we pay you? We'll just outweight, we'll outspend you. And what's the worst thing that happens to us? Well, maybe we have to pay $100,000. Maybe we have to pay $250,000, but we've made so much money doing this other stuff. We'll risk that. The economics are very, very, very different for an individual, especially someone who's been injured. They're potentially out of work. They don't have a vehicle, so they can't get to work. They can't pay their rent. They're wondering where they're going to live next week. And the response I get from these government entities are, so what?
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You also want to watch vehicles that are, and it's kind of a gray area, so that's why you always need a personal injury lawyer. But some of these are pretty easily known, like a tank hits you, and I've had that case. So I mean, it's not that crazy. Or you see a U.S. Army vehicle or Navy vehicle strike somebody, or you see a Killeen police officer car involved, something like that. It's pretty straightforward, but you always also want to watch people who are doing contract work for the city or state. They will often claim the same immunities in the same process. So like somebody doing construction on the interstate, and you have a wreck because I've had this case, water builds up or they're letting sludge mud onto the interstate, and somebody gets killed. And so you really want to have experienced lawyers handle those cases, because you almost want to play both sides of it until there's some rulings on whether or not this construction company gets the benefit of the immunity of the Texas Tort Claims Act, or whether they're on their own. And I don't want to get too much into the details on that, because even most lawyers have a hard time understanding it, to be honest with you. But
Yeah, because I know with, sorry.
Anytime there's a state, county, city, or federal government potentially involved in what happened, you certainly want to go to a lawyer as soon as possible, because like Mike said, some of these cities have very short notice periods. And it's arguable whether some of them are too short, like 30 days. Some of them might say in their city charter 30 days. And that's a whole different argument with the judge, like whether that's too short. But you want to comply if you can. And you can if you get a lawyer right away, generally comply with this stuff. So
Yeah, especially since they're complex in nature. Because you had mentioned construction and things of that nature. There is another episode in the series that deals with more construction, road signage, and like all those situations. But Craig, I had noticed you had mentioned you had a tank case. Can you go into any more detail about that? Like what happened?
sure, yeah. I mean, it happened on Fort Hood, and my client was actually initially hired another lawyer, and then they realized it's Federal Tort Claims Act, so they called our office and hired us. And our client was going to work, and he was on Fort Hood, and he was heading up one of the highways, because there's a ton of civilians that work on Fort Hood that are not in the military. And he was heading up a road, and a tank actually crossed with really no warning at all. And their tanks are made to not be seen. And this was at dusk in the morning, or I should say dawn in the morning. So it was barely light, and tanks are made not to be seen. And he hit the tank head on, had a tremendous head injury, and broke, I think, 26 bones in his body. And we had to file suit. Again, we filed a claim form. You would think that they would want to pay that claim, and had to take depositions, had to go find these soldiers that were involved and take their depositions. And only facing a court date were we able to resolve that case and get our client just recovery. But it takes a unique process to do that. And those cases, although somewhat rare with tanks, are not as rare as you think. The other thing to remember is with the Federal Tort Claims Act is, if you work for the federal government and you're a soldier, for example, and you get in a wreck, there's some complications about it. So if you're on duty and they're on duty, there's this thing called the Ferries Act, and you might not be able to sue them, the federal government, because of that. I did have a case not too long ago where my client was on leave. He came back from Iraq. He was on leave in Houston, and a DEA agent ran into the back of him at a stoplight. And him and his son were injured, and they initially denied the claim on the basis of, and that was, again, it went to another lawyer. That lawyer called me because the claim wasn't going well, and they were claiming ferries, and they were claiming that this was barred because my client was technically on active duty, but he was on leave. And there's some case law about that, whether or not you can sue, but my client clearly was not working on duty, and he was not even around Fort Hood. He was in Houston, and the DEA agent works for the federal government. And so all these agencies of the federal government are the federal government. But we had to file suit, had to go before a judge, explain the case out to actually get this individual recovery, and his son. His son wasn't a military member, So it was absurd to us that they were even claiming this privilege, but that is what these people do, often to play with claims, and it's unfortunate. There's no need to do that when they really could pay just claims. And that one, they were claiming immunity, which is crazy for the case. So
I would actually, it's crazy, but I'd actually throw in here, and I am not former military myself. Craig is, and a number of our lawyers are former service members. And I'd throw out there, even though I've done FTCA claims and I've done claims against the military. I always, when I do them, I always want to kind of buddy up with someone who's been in the military, because as silly as it sounds, and I kid you not, to a certain extent, especially the military claims, and the government is a civilian or someone without prior military experience, the jargon and the acronyms that go flying back and forth in those claims is mind-boggling. And it sounds silly, but it's a serious thing. And if you have a claim under the FTCA against a military entity, it really helps if you have a lawyer or a law firm that has folks who have been in the military, that have prior service. You know, folks like Craig. We have folks like Todd Kelly, who is in the Marine Corps. You know, William Rossick, who is in the military. We have a lot of former military members, and it really does give you an edge. And it's an important thing to have going when you have someone who represents you under these FTCA things. So I just thought I'd point that out. One of the reasons Craig is very successful in that, and a lot of our other lawyers, is because they know how the system works. They know how these people think, and they know who to actually go ask the questions to get the correct answers, as opposed to who the government wants you to talk to.
And I had a follow-up question to either one of y'all, is that because you had mentioned up these acronyms that can be on these documents, is that more of like another tactic that the government uses to sort of have pushback against, you know, anyone trying to file a claim, or is it just more or less general military words and acronyms that are necessary on the documents?
yeah, I'd say it's a little bit of both, and it matters who you're dealing with. I mean, there are really good people in the U.S. government, and the claims offices, like in the U.S. Army. They're good people who care about people, who want to pay claims and take care of people. But they have so much going on. I mean, their offices are not only dealing with like incidents where somebody runs into somebody on Fort Hood, or our outpost too with the military vehicle, but they're also dealing with household goods that get destroyed when people move. And like a lot of entities, they're swamped with work, more work than they can do a lot of times. So sometimes the delays aren't intentional. They're just a matter of a lot of work and not enough people to do it. But they also all understand the system, that if they wait you out and you don't know what you're doing, it could be 5 years later and you're still sitting around doing nothing with your case. And I've found it harder with working with state entities, much harder than working with federal government. Now, I sue the federal government quicker than I can sue, than we sue state entities, and there's no caps on the cases. There is caps in Texas on med mal cases, but they just apply the med mal caps here in Texas. But other than that, there's no caps on cases. So I'm quick to want to go to court and get experts and put my case together for a federal case, whereas in the state, I'd want to do the exact same thing for the client, but as we spend money on their case, we're devaluing their claim because they only get $250. And so if we spend $100,000 with getting the best experts in the world, or even in the state, to show the liability issues or show the damage issues, all that money comes out of our client's claim. In the end, it's $250 minus the $100,000 we just spent on these experts. And so we are very cautious about building damage models or using experts unnecessarily, because we don't want our claims. I mean, at some point the clients aren't getting much. And of course, they don't tend to blame the state for that in the end. They tend to look at the lawyers and are upset with us that, you know, that we put their case together. We had to, because the only way they got paid was by putting their case together.
Okay, okay. And now we had covered, you know, government vehicles, police cars, military vehicles. I wanted to move on to another type of vehicle, which is the school bus. Mike, I wanted to ask you this. All right, so a normal, you know, a normal civilian might not know, are school buses considered state vehicles? And also, does the presence of children on the bus itself change how a case might be handled in a collision?
Well, the school bus is considered a government vehicle, so it falls under the TTCA, Texas Tort Claims Act. And I guess the thing that's unique about it is, you know, the school districts are immune for almost everything. They have kind of a much broader immunity, because like Craig pointed out, is the default is the government is immune from a lawsuit except for the stuff that they give you permission to sue them for. So they have to pass a law that says, okay, you can sue me for car crashes, or you can sue me for a defective roadway, or you can sue me for some other thing. In the case of school districts, and we're talking public school districts, you know, private schools are something completely different. But we're talking public school districts, they're immune for just about everything, with the one exception of motor vehicle collisions, for which school buses do fall under. But the same caps apply. Now, as far as, you know, whether there's, you know, the children being in there or out there I mean, it doesn't really change what the law is. It might change the number of people who are injured. And that can be, you know, that can be a challenge, you know, and you know, it's one of these things, heaven forbid, you would never want this to happen. But if you had a school bus full, you know, one of these big full-size school buses full of children, the school bus driver does something, you know, horribly irresponsible and severely injures or kills a school bus full of children, yes, you can sue the school district. But the maximum amount that will be available ever is $500,000, because it's that $250 for an individual, and then it doubles to $500 if there's multiple people involved. But that's it. That's it. And that can really get to the point where where you have some challenges. You know, if you have severe injuries, you know, a single hospital visit for a severe injury can easily get in the many tens of thousands, if not more dollars. Multiply that like by 15 or 20 kids on a bus. There's literally not enough money to go around. There's not. So that is one challenge that can happen depending on how many kids are on it. But again, there's other things you can look at. There's other things you can look at, and you want to get creative about, well, are there things beyond? I guess that would be my answer is you'd always want to go see a lawyer to see if they can figure out, is there something in addition to the Texas Tort Claims Act that can be done here? And a lot of times the answer is yes, there is, but you have to know what to look for.
Yeah, because we've handled, and I handled a case involving a school bus where the school bus wasn't at fault. So what Mike just described was, you know, a negligence on that behalf of maybe the school bus driver or somebody like that involving the state. And I don't want to confuse people with the idea that when a school bus is hit by, like the case I had, a commercial vehicle that blew through a stop sign and hit a school bus, and, you know, 26 children, many were seriously injured. They're not under the Texas Tort Claims cap because it's another entity that hit them, even though they were on a school bus. So that cap only applies to whether the school bus driver and his negligence involved or her negligence involved with the case. It wouldn't apply to other people who run into a school bus, or another case, like Mike said, there's can be unique things like, say, a tire, there was a defective tire on the school bus. Maybe it's a manufacturer of the tire case as opposed to the school bus or suing the school district.
Exactly.
So, which is often kind of just an aside. I know that's not part of this topic, but a lot of car wrecks with serious injuries, a lot of lawyers just are limiting themselves to the insurance from the negligent party, and they never look at the airbag. What did the seatbelt hold? Did the car crush right? I mean, and really you want an experienced lawyer who will not only look at, the person who ran into me, but also looking at the airbag firing the right way. Why is my head injury so severe? Did the curtain not fall down on the side airbag? I can't tell you how many cases go underrepresented in our state because people are just so focused on the car crash and the insurance involved in the car wreck.
Okay.
Well, I'll throw this out here too is, sometimes what you want to look for is something where, people start out thinking is like, well, it has to do with the school, so this must be a school case. Here's an example I'll throw out is, a lot of times is, kids nowadays is they do senior trips or you have band competitions. And typically what happens is they charter a private bus to go do that. And that, is not that you ever wish anything bad to happen to kids, but if something happens under those circumstances, then it's not a Texas tort claims case at all. That's a commercial vehicle case. And buses, and these commercial buses are required by law nationwide is they have to have a minimum of $5 million of coverage, which gives you a lot more options. I guess that's another thing to point out. The mere fact that a school is involved in the activity doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only avenue that you can look at. Both Craig and I have handled bus cases, and several, as far as just a couple of years ago, I've handled some under that exact situation. Is a band trip from McAllen, Texas, was headed through. I think they were doing some band trip. I think they were actually going to Disney World in Florida. I think that's where they were going. And they had a crash in Alabama. But it was under a commercial charter. So Texas tort claims had nothing to do with that case. But a lot of the folks thought it was, that's when I originally met the clients, and we represented several of the parents on that bus. As they originally thought, I was like, well, does this mean we have to sue the school? And the answer is no. This has nothing to do with the school. So that's another reason you got to go talk to lawyers about this stuff, and you got to figure these things out, because there's options outside Texas tort claims.
Okay. And lastly, I wanted to ask Craig, is there some other not so known things about the Texas Tort Claims Act, or just like crashes with government entities that people may not know about or overlook?
Yeah, I mean, like I was just talking about, like the, defective tires, defective belts, defective other parts of the vehicle, but just in general, in any case, in any injury case, you really want to be talking with an experienced trial lawyer, somebody who's done these things, and you really want to inquire into their background. Like, tell me how many times you've went to court. Most people who advertise personal injury, most lawyers have never tried a personal injury case. I know that's probably shocking. I mean, would you ever go to a surgeon who has never done a surgery? Right? I mean, that's the scariness of what we have in our, in the public is people are saying, I'm a family law lawyer, I'm a criminal law lawyer, I'm a personal injury lawyer, come see me. And some of those people are trying to handle cases and they've never done it before. And when you're talking about a serious injury, and to be honest with you, every personal injury to the people who have it is a serious injury. But you really need to go to people who have done this, who have been in a courtroom, who have backgrounds in doing this. In our firm, we have lawyers who do family law, we have lawyers who do criminal law and bankruptcy. And then most of our lawyers do injury cases, and that's mostly what we do around the state. But it'd be like, when my brother's a doctor, when we go to parties, people want to come up to me and ask me about real estate matters and probate and family law. And I'm like, hey, I'll get you to a family law lawyer. Just like when my brother goes places, they want to ask him about cardiology questions and podiatry. He's not a cardiologist. So, I mean, one size doesn't fit all. And so you want really experienced injury lawyers to help you with your cases. And they're out there. You just have to do a little bit of background check on what you're doing. And I think the single question, if somebody asked me what they should ask, I'd ask them, how many times have they ever been in a courtroom and they tried that case before? And if the answer is never, then you might want to look somewhere else.
Yeah,
Totally
sounds
agree with that.
Mike, I want to ask both y'all, but Mike first, is there anything else you would like to add? Any stories or cases or anything?
Well, here's kind of a fun. I mean, this kind of goes to what Craig was saying. Is talk to the lawyer and see if see what they know about the area of law that you need help with. We've been talking. So Texas Tort Claims Act. We've been talking about school buses, police cars, ambulances. I mean, just motor vehicles, right? Here's an interesting little thing. If you actually go read the statute, the language of the statute is motor vehicles or motorized equipment. So the TTCA exemption actually covers motorized equipment, which means things like motorized pumps, generators, these these pressure vacuum machines. If it's a government owned and operated motorized equipment, that is also a claim, and I've done those claims. So it's bigger than just cars. You also have, it's like, hey, I know presumably it could be something. In fact, this is a case I actually had years ago, but someone where they were doing some work on their street, and there is a motorized generator that was owned by a government entity, and the person was in their own front yard, and the generator blew up, and it hurt the person, and that falls under the Texas Tort Claims Act, and it falls under a very easy exception. It is motorized equipment. So we were able to handle that, and it's a lot of folks. I think there's probably. I mean, honestly, I think there are probably lawyers out there who would look at that and goes, "Well, it's not a car. Sorry, they're probably immune." I'd hope not, but I'm willing to bet you that there's plenty of folks, plenty of lawyers out there that would look at it and goes like, "Sorry, not a car," so they're immune on that. So again, that's kind of an interesting little thing. It's broader than that. But this kind of, again, you need to talk to the lawyers, because a lot of this stuff boils down to, there is some really weird case decisions out there. And there's things like, for example, I told you, a generator or a pump, that's a motorized equipment, so that's okay. But get this, and I kid you not, a motor boat is not a vehicle or considered motorized equipment under the TTCA. Now, you can still go after the government on those claims, but you have to do it a different way. So that's the example. There's just so many weird things out there. Is you got to talk to the lawyers. They got to be knowledgeable about it, so they can get you going the right direction, and they can handle it in a way that is most likely to result in getting the person taken care of. I mean, here's what people want. They want their medical bills paid for. They want to make sure that they're not out of their work, out of money that they lost from not being able to go to work. And you know what? People deserve some sort of recognition for the hassle, the aggravation, the physical discomfort they're going to. And that's what the lawyer can do for you. The government makes you fight harder for it.
Yeah.
But that's all the more reason to get someone in your corner, a guy like Craig, myself. At this point we have, Craig, what do we have? Almost 40 lawyers in our firm. most of whom do personal injury, and every single one of them is really motivated, excited to help people. It's kind of what we live for.
Yeah. And Craig, is there any like lasting comments, stories, or anything you would like to add?
No, just as I said, I mean, you don't want to go this alone. If you look up the statute, I mean, Google's great, and our internet system where people are informed about stuff nowadays. But it's also very misleading, you know. So you can look up the statute and think you know what you're doing and try to handle your own claim, only to find that you don't know, like Mike just said, a lot of the law that involves all kinds of legal issues, but including tort law, is made by courts. So what might seem as plain on a, you know, when you're looking at the statute, the Texas tort statute, really plain and easy, is not plain and easy because of all these cases out there. And so you really need to get an experienced lawyer on your side. And, you know, it doesn't have to be our firm. It just needs to be somebody who's competent and experienced in your area of law. And you just need some lawyer who's experienced to help you handle your claim. And it's particularly important in governmental entity cases.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that's it for this episode of The Verdict. Be sure to keep coming back, watch and listen to our other episodes on the series about car collisions, the injuries that happen because of them, and the surrounding topics. And if you're listening to this on any podcast platform, be sure to rate us 5 stars, the maximum amount of stars you can. And if you're watching the video version on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel, the Carlson Law Firm. And also, while you're on the video version, if you'd like to dive deeper into these topics presented in today's episode, we'll have links to blogs that are relevant to this topic. And also, we're on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, at the Carlson Law Firm. We have a great team of a legal team that's bilingual, and we also have a Facebook page dedicated to Spanish at Carlson Abogados. Lastly, if you're looking for an attorney, we offer free consultations, and you can reach us at 800-359-5690. We take calls 24/7. We have multiple locations in Texas. You can visit carlsonattorneys.com. So until next time, thank you, Craig. Thank you, Mike, for joining me on today's episode.